A single dad and a powerful CEO get trapped in an elevator. He thinks she hates him until she reveals a heartbreaking secret that changes everything. Daniel Hayes burst through the revolving doors of the towering Vance corporate plaza with the frantic energy of a man who had already lived an entire day before 9 a.m. His shirt collar was crooked from juggling breakfast, school drop-off, and a work deadline he was almost certainly late for. A neon pink hair clip, his 6-year-old daughter Hannah's, was still attached to the edge of his sleeve, fluttering with each hurried step. His old leather briefcase, faded around the edges and one tug away from snapping entirely, swung at his side as he dodged polished marble pillars and polished employees who walked with the confident rhythm of people who had slept a full 8 hours. Daniel hadn't had a night like that in years. He pushed a tired hand through his messy hair and sped toward the elevator, glancing at the digital clock above the reception desk. 8:59 a.m. Great. He inhaled sharply, silently praying he wouldn't run into anyone important, especially not her. Alara Vance, the CEO, the woman whose shoes alone were worth more than his monthly rent, the woman whose cold stare could silence a room faster than the fire alarm. And yet, as he skidded to a stop in front of the elevator, an elegant hand with perfectly manicured nails shot out to stop the doors just before they closed. Daniel froze. Standing there, impossible, perfect, and intimidating as ever, was Alara Vance herself, the CEO of Vance Industries, the woman he avoided eye contact with even in staff meetings. Her dark tailored blazer hugged her figure in a way that spoke of control, power, and precision. Her hair was sleek, pinned behind her ear on one side, falling in a glossy wave on the other. She smelled faintly of jasmine and expensive decisions. Daniel swallowed his panic and stepped into the elevator, trying to shrink himself into the corner without appearing like he was shrinking himself into the corner. Her expression didn't change, not even a flicker, not annoyance, not irritation, not even the faintest acknowledgement of his existence. Just quiet, cold focus, like she had already planned her entire day down to the last second. Daniel shifted, feeling every insecurity crawl up his spine. He straightened his collar, too aware of the wrinkle across his shirt. He smoothed his hair, only then realizing a smear of pancake batter on the cuff of his sleeve. Hannah had insisted on making him breakfast, a burnt pancake shaped like a dinosaur, and he had eaten it, smiling through the charcoal taste because her gleeful laugh made everything worth it. He wondered what Alara Vance ate for breakfast. Definitely not burnt dinosaur pancakes. The elevator hummed upward, floor numbers blinking softly. Daniel clutched his coffee cup, cheap, bitter, and from the lobby kiosk whose owner insisted on calling him brother, and prayed he wouldn't spill it. His nerves always acted up around her. She wasn't just the CEO, she was the symbol of everything he didn't have. Stability, power, control, hair that wasn't permanently exhausted. She stood completely still, her perfect posture making him straighten instinctively. Her eyes were fixed ahead, deep and steady like she was calculating budgets or employee worthiness or the meaning of life. Daniel tried to breathe normally, reminding himself he was just another employee. Invisible, harmless, perfect. Until the elevator suddenly jerked. Hard. A violent thud rattled through the cabin, the lights flickered, buzzing overhead like nervous insects. And then everything stopped. Literally. The elevator froze between floors. Silence dropped like a weight. Daniel blinked, clutching his coffee so hard he nearly cracked the cup. He whispered, was that supposed to happen? Alara's eyes finally flicked toward him, cool, controlled, unreadable. Clearly not, she replied, her voice smooth but tense underneath. She pressed the emergency call button as calmly as if she were ordering morning tea. Daniel pressed his back against the wall, breathing shallowly. Elevators were not his friend. Small spaces weren't his friend. Unexpected malfunctions, definitely not his friend. The air felt thicker, warmer, like the walls were slowly closing in. He loosened his tie, trying not to look panicked. Alara, meanwhile, seemed carved from marble. Maintenance, she said sharply into the speaker. The elevator between floors 14 and 15 has stopped. I need an immediate response. Daniel wondered if the maintenance team would move faster simply because it was her calling. Probably. If he had been alone, he'd still be listening to badly recorded hold music. Minutes passed, then more, and the silence between them thickened into something awkward, uncomfortable, and far too intimate for two people who barely knew each other. Daniel cleared his throat. So,
great way to start the morning." She didn't respond at first. Her jaw tightened, her hand smoothed her blazer, as if ironing out tension. For a moment, he thought she might ignored him entirely. Then, to his shock, she said quietly, "I had a very different plan for today." Her voice was softer, weaker than he'd ever heard it. Human. Daniel blinked. She was talking to him, voluntarily. "Yeah," he chuckled nervously, "actually slightly better than this." Her gaze slid to his coffee and battered briefcase. You look like someone who has a lot on his shoulders." He laughed once, awkwardly. "Single parent life? It's basically schedule chaos with a side of emotional bankruptcy." And for the first time ever, he saw it. A flicker. A crack in her flawless mask, a tiny spark of something he couldn't place. Sympathy, recognition, pain. But before he could understand it, the elevator groaned loudly again, lights dimming. He tensed, gripping the railing. "Please don't drop," he muttered. Ilara steadied herself, not looking nearly as calm as before. Her fingers curled tightly around the rail. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and in that instant, Daniel realized something startling. She wasn't just uncomfortable, she was scared. The elevator had stopped, but the real story had just begun. For several long seconds after the elevator lurched to a stop, Daniel Hayes stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat, waiting for gravity, or fate, to decide what came next. But nothing happened. No drop, no sudden freefall, just stillness, heavy and unnatural, like the entire world had paused mid-heartbeat. The lights flickered weakly, buzzing overhead with a sickly hum, casting Ilara Vance's sharp features into alternating shadows and pale glows that made her look less like an untouchable CEO and more like a statue carved by anxiety itself. Daniel exhaled shakily, his fingers clamped so tightly around his coffee cup that the lid bent inward. "Okay," he whispered to himself, "don't panic. Definitely don't panic." But his chest tightened anyway. He wasn't good with enclosed spaces, and he absolutely wasn't good at being trapped with someone whose shoes alone cost more than his car. Ilara stepped forward with that same mechanical composure she always carried, though her shoulders were unmistakably rigid. She pushed the emergency button again, her voice firm, controlled, and edged with something new, something human. "Maintenance, this is CEO Ilara Vance. The elevator has malfunctioned between 14 and 15. I need an immediate update." There was a burst of static, then a nervous voice. "Yes, ma'am. We're working on it. Looks like a system overload. We'll get you moving as fast as possible." Ilara Vance's smallest tightening of her jaw. System overload. Great. That sounded like the kind of thing people said right before elevators plummeted in movies. The air inside the cabin felt thicker by the second. He loosened his tie, trying to ignore the claustrophobic pressure squeezing his ribcage. Hana used to hug him like that. Too tight, too sudden, but hers was comforting. This wasn't. He pressed the back of his head against the wall and exhaled slowly. "Don't panic. Don't embarrass yourself. Don't throw up in front of your CEO." Ilara turned slightly, glancing at him with curious scrutiny, as if noticing his discomfort for the first time. Her eyes, cold, calculating, hazel, softened by a millimeter. "Are you all right?" The question startled him. She had never spoken to him directly in the office unless it involved quarterly reports, schedules, or an accidental photocopier jam. "Just not great with small spaces," he admitted with a strained laugh, "or elevators with personality." Her lips moved as though she wanted to smile, but didn't. Instead, she crossed her arms, tapping her nails lightly against her sleeve, a rhythmic attempt to steady herself. "I don't like them either." He blinked. Ilara Vance, the fearless leader of a billion-dollar corporation, didn't like elevators. "Really?" he asked before he could stop himself. Her gaze stayed fixed ahead. "I prefer stairs." "You work on the 32nd floor," he pointed out. "I never said I took the stairs," she replied, but her voice cracked faintly, betraying the nervous energy beneath her polished composure. A silence followed, long, tense, suffocating. But this time, it wasn't the same icy silence from before. It was awkward, human, as though both of them were thinking too loudly. The elevator creaked again, swaying the slightest inch. Daniel's heart shot to his throat, but Ilara's hand instinctively gripped the rail hard enough for her knuckles to go white. Her breathing hitched, so brief most people would miss it, but Daniel had been a single dad long enough to recognize the sound of someone trying not to show fear. And suddenly, something shifted inside him. She wasn't a cold CEO right now. She wasn't the intimidating boss with flawless posture and impossible standards. She was just a person, a scared one. "Hey," he said softly, surprising even himself. "It's okay. We're not going anywhere." "That," she murmured tightly, "is exactly what concerns me." His honesty stunned him. Ilara never let her guard down, ever. Not in meetings, not in hallways, not even when rumors swirled about boardroom pressure or sleepless nights. Yet here, trapped in a steel box with flickering lights, she allowed the truth to slip through the cracks of her armor. Daniel shifted, trying to steady his own nerves. He attempted humor, the only coping mechanism he had. "Well, if it helps, this is still better than my morning drop-off. Hana refused to go to school unless I braided her hair like a unicorn." Ilara blinked, hard. Then, as if dragged against her will, a tiny, almost fragile smile tugged at the corner of her lips. It wasn't much, but it was more emotion than he had ever seen from her. "A unicorn," she echoed softly. "That must have been an interesting hairstyle." "Oh, it was magical. Magically terrible." She exhaled. Not a laugh, not quite, but something gentler than silence. The elevator, still unmoving, seemed to shrink around them in a different way now. Not crushing, not suffocating, just forcing them closer in an invisible sense. Forcing two lives that never intersected to suddenly share a space too small for titles, roles, or masks. Ilara turned her head slowly, studying him, not with irritation, but with curiosity. "You're a single parent?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, just us since Hana was little." "That must be difficult," she said quietly, as if the words felt foreign in her mouth. "Exhausting, rewarding, terrifying, mostly a mix of all three." She absorbed his words in silence, her posture easing, her arms uncrossing, as though the truth he shared had disarmed her. For the first time, Daniel felt like she wasn't looking through him, but at him. Then, before either could speak again, the elevator lights dimmed sharply, plunging the cabin into a near darkness broken only by the emergency bulb. Ilara inhaled sharply, an involuntary, unmistakable gasp of fear. Daniel's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, he stepped forward, placing himself near her, not touching, but close enough to let her know she wasn't alone. Her breathing steadied, slowly. Then she whispered, so faint he almost didn't catch it. "I don't like this." Vulnerability, pure, raw, and startling. And with it the atmosphere shifted entirely. For the first time in their lives, Daniel and Ilara stood on the same ground. Not single dad and CEO, not employee and superior, just two people, scared, stuck, human. And for reasons neither understood yet, the moment felt like the opening door to a story they never expected to share.
The dim emergency light flickered weakly overhead as Daniel and Ilara stood together in the stalled elevator, the silence between them growing thicker by the minute, no longer icy, but strangely charged, like the stillness after a storm that has not yet decided whether it is finished. Daniel tried to steady his own breathing, both for himself and for her, because even though she hid it well, he could feel the tremor of fear radiating from her like a suppressed heartbeat. The hum of the elevator was gone, replaced by the faint rattle of loose cables and the distant hum of the building's machinery, making the space feel smaller, lonelier, too quiet to ignore what was happening inside either of them. He tightened his grip on the coffee cup, realizing that his attempt at humor earlier had actually made her smile. And that single fleeting expression had cut through more of his nerves than any elevator malfunction ever could. Finally, in the thick silence, he cleared his throat and said, "Well, if we're going to be stuck in here a while, at least we can both agree the coffee is terrible." His voice wobbled at first, but he forced it into something resembling casual. Ilara blinked slowly, and for a moment, he thought she might retreat back into her usual cold professionalism. But then her lips parted, and a breathy, almost reluctant amusement slipped out. "It is," she admitted, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "I don't know why I keep buying it." "Habit," Daniel said. "Or maybe you like suffering." Her eyes, sharp but tired, lifted toward him. "Not particularly." "Really? Could have fooled me," he joked gently, "considering you run an entire company." To his shock, a genuine curve lifted the edge of her mouth, tiny but real. I suppose it does look like self-inflicted punishment sometimes. Something about seeing her like this, unguarded, almost human, made the cabin feel different, warmer despite the stale air. Daniel leaned back against the wall, trying to look calm even though the cramped space still gnawed at his nerves. He glanced down at his worn briefcase, partly to avoid staring at her too long, partly because her gaze was suddenly making him feel seen in a way he hadn't expected. Alara followed his eyes. "Your daughter?" she asked, nodding toward the corner of the photo peeking out from the strap. Daniel smiled at the memory behind it. "Yeah, Hannah. She insists on putting a new picture in every year, says it keeps me from forgetting what she looks like, as if I could ever forget my own kid." Alara's expression softened in a way he had never witnessed, subtle, tender, almost aching. She must be special. She is. Too smart for her own good, and too stubborn for mine. Alara looked down, her hands clasping together, as though the mention of a child had reached a part of her she kept locked away. "And you're raising her alone?" Daniel nodded. "Since she was 2. Life didn't go according to plan, but we manage." "That sounds incredibly difficult," she murmured, her voice low and heavy with something deeper than sympathy. Daniel shrugged, though the strain beneath it showed. "Yeah, it is. But she's worth it. Every chaotic morning, every sleepless night, every burnt pancake. She's all I've got." Alara's throat seemed to tighten, her eyes flickering with something unspoken. Pain, guilt, longing, maybe all three. The silence that followed wasn't cold or strained, it was a bridge, slowly forming, plank by plank. And then, because the moment felt too heavy and he desperately needed to lighten it, he lifted his mangled coffee cup. "Plus, caffeine helps me from fainting in elevators." Alara let out a quiet sigh that almost sounded like a laugh. "I suppose it has its uses." "Oh, definitely," he said. "It gives me the strength to survive board meetings. Especially yours." Her head whipped toward him, but before he could panic, he saw it again, a small, warm shimmer of amusement. "Are they that bad?" she asked. "Bad?" Daniel scoffed dramatically. "They're legendary. I heard one guy transfer departments just so he wouldn't have to present the weekly numbers to you." Alara raised an eyebrow. "Is that true?" Daniel gave her a mock serious nod. "Absolutely. Rumor says he still has nightmares." Her lips curved again, this time unmistakably. The CEO, who usually moved like a carved statue of composure, now seemed almost relaxed, her shoulders no longer stiff, her jaw no longer clenched. She looked lighter, less like the powerful icon the world feared, and more like someone who had been carrying something alone for too long. The elevator creaked again, swaying just enough to make Daniel instinctively brace himself. Alara, though she tried to hide it, tensed visibly, her fingers gripping the metal railing until her knuckles blanched. Daniel stepped slightly closer, not to invade, but to reassure. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly. She swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just don't like this feeling." Being stuck? Her eyes flickered. Being out of control. Daniel understood that more than she knew. He didn't have control over anything. His finances, his time, his sleep, his life. But seeing someone like her admit to the same fear made the elevator feel strangely safer. "Well, you don't have to control everything right now. I mean, it's just us. 2 humans trapped in a box of bad engineering and worse lighting." Her breath hitched, but this time wasn't panic. It was a quiet, broken laugh. And that was the moment something finally shifted, truly shifted between them. The walls didn't feel like walls anymore. The silence didn't feel like distance. And Alara Vance, the CEO who ruled entire boardrooms with iron precision, was no longer looking down at him, but straight at him, as though for the first time she truly saw him. And Daniel, for reasons he couldn't explain, felt himself seeing.
The elevator remained still, suspended between floors like a forgotten thought.
And for the longest moment, neither Daniel nor Ilara spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was charged, humming with unspoken truths and the weight of two very different lives unexpectedly colliding. Daniel could feel the shift beneath the surface, like they were standing at the edge of something neither had meant to reach, but now couldn't step back from. He glanced at Ilara, expecting the CEO mask to slide back into place, expecting her to retreat into the polished, untouchable version of herself the world believed in. But she didn't. Instead, she stood there, with her hands clasped a little too tightly in front of her, her breathing shallow, her gaze unfocused, not in calculation, but in memory. He heard himself speak before his mind could second-guess it. "Sorry for oversharing earlier," he murmured, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't usually dump my life story on people, especially not my boss." She didn't look up immediately. Her gaze stayed fixed on a distant point, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than he had ever heard it, careful, almost fragile. "No," she said softly, "it's refreshing." That word caught him off guard. Refreshing? She nodded slowly. "People don't talk to me like that. Not honestly. Not humanly." Daniel blinked, studying her more closely. "I find that hard to believe." "It's true," she whispered, her gaze finally lifting to meet his. "People talk at me. They talk around me. They talk about me. But they never talk to me." Something in her eyes, a glimmer of loneliness so sharp it almost startled him, made Daniel take a quiet breath. "Well, I can do more talking," he said lightly, trying to ease the heaviness settling around her. "Just say the word." For the smallest moment, a tiny, fleeting smile touched her lips, but just as quickly it faded, replaced by something tight and conflicted. She turned away, her fingers brushing over her bracelet in a nervous rhythm, like she was weighing something internally. A secret, a memory, a burden she wasn't sure she was ready to share. Daniel sensed it, not through any grand intuition, but in the subtle way her shoulders stiffened, the way her jaw tensed, the way she pressed her lips together like trying to hold back words fighting to escape. "You said earlier that being a single parent is terrifying." He nodded. "It is." Her breath hitched softly. "But you still do it." "Because I don't have a choice. She needs me." Ilara closed her eyes. For a brief second, her face cracked, not literally, but emotionally, like the perfectly framed portrait she had spent years constructing had been struck by a tremor. She whispered, her voice trembling. "I know what that kind of fear feels like." Daniel's heart stilled. He wasn't sure why, but the tone of her voice made the hairs on his neck rise. She wasn't talking about stress, or business, or exhaustion. She was talking about something else, something more intimate, something painful. "Ilara," he said gently, "you don't have to—" "I lost her." The words came out so suddenly, so softly, so painfully that Daniel almost didn't register them at first. He blinked. You lost who?" Ilara opened her eyes, blinking rapidly, her breath trembling like she was trying to hold back a storm. "My daughter," she whispered, her voice cracking on the last word. The world seemed to stop. Not the elevator, not the building, but the world inside that small cabin. Daniel felt the air drain from his lungs. He stared at her, his mind scrambling to understand the weight of what she had just revealed. I didn't know," he said softly. She shook her head slowly. "No one knows." A silence thicker than any before settled between them. The emergency light flickered again, casting her face in a pale glow that made her look nothing like the unshakable CEO people saw in boardrooms. She looked like a woman carrying a wound that had never healed. "It was years ago," she said, her voice barely audible. "Before the company, before any of this. I was young, unprepared, and life didn't unfold the way I imagined. She was premature, too small.
too fragile. She lived only a few hours. Daniel swallowed hard, his chest tightening painfully. He had no words, none that felt worthy of her grief. Ilara continued, her voice trembling like a cracked violin. I buried myself in work because it was the only place where I didn't have to think, the only place where I didn't have to feel. People think I'm cold, distant, ruthless. They think I chose power over humanity. She turned toward him, eyes shimmering, not cold, not hard, but broken. But the truth is, I have been grieving quietly, silently for years, and I didn't know how to stop. Daniel stepped closer, not touching her, but standing near enough that she could feel the warmth of another human being, a tether in a moment when she seemed like she might collapse under the weight of her confession. Ilara, he whispered. The softness in his voice reached a part of her no one else ever had. I'm so sorry. A single tear slipped down her cheek, glistening under the emergency light like a memory she had held on to for too long. She didn't wipe it away. She just let it fall. And for the first time since he had met her, Daniel saw her completely. Not a CEO, not an icon, not a flawless figure of authority, but a mother. A grieving, hurting mother who had carried her pain alone for too long. In that suspended space, between two floors and two worlds, something shifted forever, and neither of them would leave the elevator the same.
The elevator felt impossibly still after Ilara's confession, as if even the machinery understood the heaviness of her truth and chose not to intrude. Daniel stood frozen, not out of fear or discomfort, but out of reverence for the vulnerability she had just revealed, a vulnerability no one in the world had ever been allowed to see. The woman who commanded boardrooms and silenced entire departments with a single raised brow now stood before him trembling, shoulders slightly hunched, breathing uneven, like she had been carrying a weight so suffocating that finally releasing it left her unsteady on her feet. Daniel felt something in his chest shift painfully, not out of pity, but out of a profound human recognition. Loss was something he knew too well. Different, yes, but grief had a universal shape, a quiet ache that made the world feel tilted forever. He approached her slowly, giving her the space to pull back if she needed, but she didn't move away. She seemed anchored to the moment, to him, to the only person who had ever heard this part of her story. I don't talk about it, she whispered, her voice breaking again. Not with friends, not with family. Honestly, I don't even talk about it with myself. I buried it so deeply I thought I could outrun it. Daniel shook his head gently. You don't have to outrun it. She let out a breath, shaky, fragile, and full of years of suppressed sorrow. I tried, she said. I tried so hard. I threw myself into work because numbers don't change when you look at them. Budgets don't disappear. Business doesn't die. It felt safer than loving something that could be taken away. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. But every time I see someone with their child, every time I see a little girl run across the plaza or hear laughter echo in the building, her breath cracked. It feels like losing her all over again. Daniel's heart tightened. You loved her, he murmured softly. Of course you feel that way. Ilara stared at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. No one ever says it like that. Like what? Like it's normal? Like I'm allowed to feel this way. Most people just look at me awkwardly like grief is an inconvenience. Or worse, they look at me like I should be over it by now. Daniel shook his head slowly. Grief doesn't work on a timer. It doesn't expire. She blinked hard, another tear slipping down her cheek. I kept telling myself that moving on meant I had to forget her, but forgetting felt like betrayal. And remembering felt like drowning. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. You built walls, Daniel said gently. High ones. She let out a shaky laugh, one that held no humor. Higher than I ever meant to. And the worst part, people think I enjoy being alone. They think I built a kingdom to keep others out. But the truth is, she looked down at her trembling hands. I'm not strong at all. I'm just hiding. Daniel felt something twist inside him,
the urge to pull her into a hug, to erase the years of isolation she had endured. But instead, he stepped closer, his voice low and sincere. "You're stronger than you think. Not because you hid your pain, but because you survived it." Her breath hitched, and for the first time since the elevator had stopped, she looked directly into his eyes with a rawness so intense he felt it like a physical touch. "How do you do it?" she whispered. "How do you talk about being a single father like it's something possible, something survivable?" Daniel inhaled deeply. "Because I have to. Hannah needs me. And when someone needs you that badly, you don't get to fall apart. Not completely. But that doesn't mean I don't want to." She watched him, eyes softening with something like understanding. "You make it sound human," she murmured. "Not heroic." "It's not heroic. It's love. Messy, exhausting, beautiful love. The kind that keeps you standing when nothing else does." A small broken smile touched her lips. "I never got to experience that." "You did," Daniel said quietly. "For the hours she lived, she had you. She had a mother who loved her fiercely. That matters, Ilara. That counts." The words hit her with unexpected force. For a moment she pressed her hand against her chest, as if steadying the ache there, an ache she had kept caged for too long. She closed her eyes, a tear rolling down her cheek, but this time she wiped it away. Not out of shame, but as if acknowledging it openly for the first time. "I don't know why I'm telling you all this," she whispered, voice trembling. Daniel offered a soft, warm smile. "Maybe because it's been trapped inside you, just like we're trapped in here. Maybe the elevator forced everything out." She let out a breathy laugh, wet, fragile, but genuine. Some leadership guru would call this a metaphor. "Well," Daniel said, "leadership guru or not, I think you needed this moment." She looked down, a quiet honesty crossing her face. "I think I did." And in that still, suspended space, their worlds, so different, so distant, aligned in the one place where neither could hide. Daniel saw her not as the powerful CEO who intimidated half the company, but as a grieving mother who had carried a silent wound for years. And Ilara saw him not as another employee, but as someone who understood loss, understood fear, understood the strength it took to keep going, even when the world felt unbearably heavy. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something more profound, a connection carved not from convenience or circumstance, but from shared humanity, shared pain, shared truth. Something that didn't happen in boardrooms, something that didn't happen in ordinary days, something that could only be born in the fragile stillness between two broken hearts, learning how to breathe again.
The elevator groaned back to life with a sudden jolt, a shudder that rippled across the metal flooring and vibrated through Daniel and Ilara like an abrupt reminder that the world outside still existed, impatient, loud, and unaware of the storm that had passed quietly between them. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The hum of reactivated machinery echoed through the cabin, but the air between them remained suspended, charged with all the things they had said and all the things they hadn't. Daniel's breath caught as the fluorescent lights flickered brighter, illuminating the lingering traces of tears on Ilara's cheeks, softening even more the hardened lines the world had carved into her. She quickly lifted a hand, brushing away the evidence of vulnerability with a grace that was less about hiding and more about steadying herself for the reality waiting beyond the doors. Daniel felt a small ache at the sight, an ache shaped by empathy, by connection, by something he wasn't ready to name. Before he could speak, the elevator shook gently again, and with a mechanical sigh, the doors parted. Bright hallway lights spilled into the cabin, cool and sharp, and for a surreal second, Daniel felt as if he were emerging from a different dimension entirely, a place where time had slowed, emotions had surfaced, and two people had allowed themselves to be human. Maintenance staff rushed forward, their eyes widening at the sight of Ilara Vance, disheveled in a way the building had likely never seen. "Ma'am, are you all right?" one of them stammered. Ilara lifted a hand.
not coldly, but calmly, and said, "I'm fine. Please focus on fixing the malfunction so this doesn't happen again." Her voice had regained its polished steadiness, but Daniel, who now recognized the tremor she hid beneath her tone, understood the difference. She wasn't wearing her armor because she wanted to. She was putting it back on because she thought the world required it. Daniel stepped out behind her, the hallway buzzing with distant conversations, clicking keyboards, and the usual rush of corporate life. Yet it all felt strangely muted, background noise to the gravity of the private universe they had just shared. Ilara took a few steps forward, then stopped. She turned slightly, her gaze seeking him with a subtle urgency, as if afraid that speaking too loudly would shatter whatever delicate connection had formed between them. "Daniel," she said quietly. His name in her voice felt different now, full of recognition, of quiet trust, of something new that had been born in the darkened elevator. "Yes," he answered, equally soft. She opened her mouth, closed it again, and exhaled slowly. "Thank you," she said at last, "for listening, for not treating me differently after what I told you." Daniel gave a warm, steady smile. Everyone deserves someone to listen. Her eyes softened, her expression shifting into something so vulnerable he wondered how she hid this side from the world every day. "Most people don't listen to me. Not really." He hesitated, then said gently, "Maybe you don't let them." Her breath caught, and her gaze flickered with the ache of truth. "Maybe," she whispered. Silence wrapped around them, soft, warm, understanding. Not the uncomfortable silence from hours earlier, but a new one, shaped by shared pain and unexpected closeness. Footsteps echoed from down the hall, and Ilara straightened, slipping back into the role the world demanded. But this time, something was different. The steel in her posture had softened. The coldness in her eyes had thawed into something warm, something painfully human. She took one step closer to him, not enough to draw attention, but enough that he could feel the gentle hum of emotion radiating from her. "I meant what I said in there. I've been hiding for a long time. Too long." Daniel nodded. "You don't have to hide from me." Her breath trembled not from fear, but from the unfamiliarity of being seen, truly seen. "I don't know what happens now," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Neither do I, and that's okay." She exhaled, a slow, relieved release of air that seemed to lighten her entire frame. For a fleeting second, she allowed herself to simply exist, just a woman standing with a man who understood her in ways no one else had. Then the hallway echoed with new footsteps, executives approaching, voices calling her name, urgent and oblivious. Ilara's gaze flickered toward them, and in that second Daniel saw her slipping her CEO persona back on like a familiar coat. But before she fully turned away, she looked at him one last time, with gratitude, with longing, with a promise. "Daniel," she said softly, "this isn't the end." His heartbeat stumbled. "I hope not." A small, genuine smile curved her lips, the kind that had taken hours of vulnerability, truth, and broken walls to reveal. "We'll talk. Soon." Then she walked away, the click of her heels fading into the fabric of the corridor, but her presence lingering like a warm imprint on his chest. Daniel watched her go and feeling the world settle back into motion, feeling the tension of the morning unravel into something strange and hopeful. He inhaled deeply, clutching his battered briefcase, and for once he didn't feel small in the towering building that had always made him feel invisible, because somewhere in those marble hallways was someone who had finally seen him, and whom he had finally been allowed to see. As he turned toward his department, his steps lighter than they had been in years, Daniel knew one thing with absolute certainty. The elevator hadn't just been a mechanical malfunction, it had been a catalyst, a turning point, a moment that cracked two lonely worlds open just enough for hope to slip through. Maybe fate did trap them for a reason. And maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning of a story neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed.
If you enjoyed this emotional story, Make sure to like the video and subscribe to Drew Daily Stories. Your support helps us bring more heart-touching stories every single day. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next twist-filled episode.